In Seoul, where skyscrapers touch the sky and hearts close like vaults, the life of Lee Jin-woo, a widowed and cold CEO, was a solitary melody. His mansion, vast and impeccable, echoed the emptiness left by his wife, and his two daughters, Ha-yoon and Ji-woo, carried the weight of a silent sorrow. No one could fill that space, not even the cooks who came and went, unable to warm the palate or the soul of that family. But fate, with its peculiar irony, decided that change would come from where it was least expected. A young cook, Kim Min-ji, exhausted and hungry, collapsed right there at the gate of his fortress of glass and marble. He helped her, on an impulse he himself didn't understand, and brought her inside. What he didn't know was that Min-ji would bring not only new flavors to his table, but a truth that his daughters, with the purity of their hearts, were about to reveal. A truth that could melt the ice in his heart and rewrite everyone's destiny. Would the taste of her food be able to heal such deep wounds? And what would happen when Seoul society tried to pluck this humble flower from his garden? The silence in the Lee mansion was a heavy cloak, broken only by the distant drip of a faucet or the whisper of the wind through the garden's pine trees. But that night, a new sound emerged, the soft, rhythmic breathing of Kim Min-ji. She awoke slowly, her mind clouded, her body aching. The smell of disinfectant and the soft touch of the sheets beneath her skin were strange, too luxurious for her reality. She opened her eyes to a high ceiling, adorned with details she'd only seen in magazines. It wasn't the cold street pavement, nor the small rented room she shared with other lost hopes. A shiver ran down her spine. Where was she? How had she gotten there? The last thing she remembered was exhaustion, hunger gnawing at her insides, and darkness swallowing her at the gate of an imposing residence. Then, the image of a tall man with piercing eyes bending over her surfaced. Lee Jin-woo, the CEO, the man who, for a reason still incomprehensible, had rescued her. A maid, in an impeccable uniform and a face that barely hid her curiosity, entered the room. "The young lady is awake. Mr. Lee asked me to inform you that breakfast will be served shortly. If you can, he would like to speak." Min-ji felt a knot in her throat. Speak? About what? Her mind, though weak, was already calculating the possibilities. Would it be a reprimand? An offer of charity that she, out of pride, could not accept? Or perhaps the chance she had so desperately sought? With trembling legs, but kindled determination, she rose. The bathroom, larger than her old apartment, offered a warm, invigorating shower. Looking at herself in the mirror, she saw a stranger, tired eyes, but with a renewed sparkle, tangled hair now combed. She had no suitable clothes. The maid, as if reading her thoughts, brought a simple yet elegant outfit that seemed to have been left there for her. In the dining room, the table was a spectacle of fine porcelain and silver cutlery. Lee Jin-woo was already seated, imposing, reading a newspaper. His daughters, Ha-yoon and Ji-woo, were beside him, their faces pale and their eyes, despite their young age, carrying a deep melancholy. They barely touched their food. Jin-woo lowered the newspaper, his cold eyes meeting Min-ji's. "Good morning, Ms. Kim. I hope you rested well." His voice was formal, distant. "I brought you here because you seem to need help. My previous cook resigned yesterday. If you are willing, you can prepare something. If not, you can leave when you feel better." The proposal was a thread of hope, a test. Min-ji felt her heart race. "Yes, sir. I would like to try." In the kitchen, the environment was one of aseptic modernity, state-of-the-art utensils, fresh and exotic ingredients. She was in her element, but the pressure was immense. She could not fail. She remembered the simple, comforting dishes her grandmother used to make, those that warmed the soul on cold days. She decided not to try to impress with extravagance, but with authenticity. In a short time, the aroma of a steaming jjigae with its rich and spicy broth and the smell of freshly prepared banchan began to fill the mansion. It was a different smell, more homely, more inviting than anything the Li family had smelled in years. Jinwoo, Ha-yun, and Ji-woo sat at the table again. Jinwoo's expression was skeptical, the girls cautiously curious. Minji served the jjigae, her eyes fixed on their reactions. Jinwoo picked up his chopsticks, hesitated for a moment, and then tasted. His eyes, previously so inexpressive, showed a flicker. It wasn't just tasty. It was familiar in a way he couldn't identify, but it stirred something dormant within him. The girls, encouraged by their father's reaction, also tasted. Ha-yun, the elder at 10 years old, picked up a piece of tofu and put it in her mouth. A small, almost imperceptible smile appeared on her lips. Ji-woo, the youngest, who rarely ate more than 2 spoonfuls, took some more. "It's good," Ha-yun murmured, her voice soft. It was the first time in a long time she had praised the food. Jinwoo looked at his daughters, then at Minji. There was something in those dishes that transcended taste. It was as if the food brought a warmth the mansion had forgotten. That night, the girls ate more than they had in weeks, and as Minji cleaned the kitchen, she heard the children's voices coming from the living room. "Daddy, Annie's food is the best," Ji-woo exclaimed. "Yes, Daddy, she cooks like Mommy used to cook," Ha-yun added, her voice almost a whisper. Ha-yun's words hit Jinwoo like a lightning bolt. "Like Mommy." He looked at the kitchen where Minji was, oblivious to the depth of their words. What were his daughters saying? Was it just the nostalgia of a taste? Or was there something more? A truth, perhaps, that he was too blind to see, and that his daughters, with the purity of their hearts, were about to unravel. The tension in the mansion had not diminished. It had merely changed form, transforming into a silent expectation, a premonition that fate was about to reveal its cards. And Minji, the fallen cook, was the ace up its sleeve. Ha-yun's words echoed in the vast dining room, piercing the silence like shards of glass. "She cooks like Mommy used to cook." Lee Jinwoo felt a chill down his spine, a sensation he hadn't experienced since his wife's death. It was as if a ghost had whispered in his ear. He looked at Ha-yun, then at Ji-woo, who nodded, her eyes shining with a long-forgotten joy. Their pure hearts, devoid of adult defenses and cynicism, had recognized something that he, in his grief and isolation, had refused to see. Minji, oblivious to the emotional storm her pots had unleashed, continued in the kitchen, washing utensils with methodical efficiency. The smell of jjigae still lingered in the air, a warm invitation that contrasted with the mansion's usual coldness. For her, this was just a job, a chance to survive, to prove her worth. But for the Li family, it was much more. It was a portal to the past, an echo of lost happiness. Jinwoo watched his daughters. For the first time in years, they not only ate, but savored the meal. There was a sparkle in their eyes, a lightness in their movements that time had stolen. The sadness that enveloped them like a heavy veil seemed to have dissipated, if only for a brief moment. He felt a lump in his throat. Was it possible that a simple cook, a stranger who collapsed at his gate, could bring back what he, with all his fortune and power, could not? The idea was absurd, and yet the evidence was there, before his eyes. That night, the Li mansion was not a silent tomb. There were soft laughs coming from the girls' room and the sound of a story being read, something that hadn't happened since their mother's passing. Minji, finishing her chores, heard the voices, feeling a strange warmth in her chest. She didn't know what she had done to deserve that moment of peace, but gratitude filled her. She was just a cook, But perhaps, just perhaps, she could be something more to those children. The next day, Seoul's sun bathed the mansion in a golden glow, but the tension, though different, persisted. Jin-woo, in his office, tried to focus on reports, but his mind wandered to the kitchen, to the aroma that now seemed to be an integral part of the house. He caught himself observing Minji through the window as she watered the garden flowers, a small smile on her lips. She wasn't like the others. There was a resilience in her eyes, a dignity in her movements, even in her simplicity. "Daddy, Uni is going to make tteokbokki today," Ji-woo exclaimed, bursting into the office with Ha-eun in tow. Their faces were animated, a rare sight. Jin-woo lowered his glasses, surprised. "Uni, you're already so close." Ha-eun, the more thoughtful one, explained. "She told us stories about her grandmother, and she taught us how to make paper folds. She's nice, Daddy." The word nice was an understatement. The girls were enchanted, and Jin-woo realized that, in just one day, Minji had done more to fill the void in his daughters than any nanny or psychologist he had hired. Later, Jin-woo called Minji to his office. The formality of the room was intimidating, but Minji maintained her posture, her heart pounding. "Miss Kim," Jin-woo began, his voice still distant but with a slightly different tone. "My daughters, they seem to like you very much, and your food." Minji felt a relief. "I'm glad to hear that, sir. It's an honor. I would like to make you an offer. I would like you to stay, as a cook and perhaps as a presence for the girls, at least for a while." The proposal was a miracle, a roof, food, a salary. But there was something more in his voice, a hesitation, a vulnerability that Jin-woo rarely showed. I accept, sir. I will do my best." "Excellent. You will have your own room and a fair salary. But understand, Ms. Kim, this is not just a house. It is a home that needs healing. And my daughters, they are my priority." His eyes fixed on hers, a veiled warning. Minji nodded, understanding the weight of the responsibility. She knew she was treading on delicate ground. This man, with his aura of power and his palpable pain, was an enigma, and his daughters, with their innocence, were the key to something she still couldn't decipher. As Minji returned to the kitchen, a new sense of purpose propelled her. She had a place, for now. But the Lee mansion was a glass castle, and the outside world, with its judgments and expectations, was just waiting for the opportunity to cast its first stone. The truth the girls were about to reveal was not just about the taste of food, it was about the soul, about connections that transcended time and memory. And Jin-woo, the widowed CEO, was about to discover that fate had brought to his door not just a cook, but a mirror to his own past, a past he had tried to bury under layers of ice and marble. The lonely melody of the Lee mansion was about to gain new notes, and not all would be harmonious. The Lee mansion, once a monument to silence and melancholy, began to vibrate with a new rhythm. Minji, now officially the girls' cook and caregiver, felt the weight and sweetness of this responsibility. Her room, simple but cozy, was a refuge, but true life happened in the kitchen, in the garden, and in the corridors where the children's laughter began to echo again. She dedicated herself to work with fervent dedication, each dish prepared with the intention of nourishing not only the body, but also the soul of that fragmented family. For Ha-eun and Ji-woo, Minji was a breath of fresh air. She not only cooked delicious dishes that reminded them of their mother, but also brought a gentle and playful energy. She taught them to make small paper boats that floated in the garden fountain, told stories of her own humble childhood, and patiently listened to the childish confidences and dreams that seemed to have been forgotten. The sadness that enveloped them like a heavy cloak began to dissipate, revealing the innocent joy that was rightfully theirs. Lee Jinwoo observed everything from afar, a shadow of skepticism still lingering in his gaze, but also a growing perplexity. He saw his daughters smile, eat with appetite, and even ask Minji to put them to sleep, something they hadn't done with anyone since their mother's death. The mansion, which once seemed like a mausoleum, now had life. The aroma of kimchi jjigae, or fresh bulgogi, replaced the sterile smell of disinfectant and the expensive perfume of the former cook. It was a smell of home, of comfort, of something he had lost and didn't know how to recover. "Daddy, Unni sings us to sleep," Jiwoo exclaimed one night, her eyes shining. "She sings a song Mommy used to sing. Remember, Daddy?" Jinwoo felt a shiver. He remembered. An old lullaby, a soft melody his wife used to hum. How could Minji know? He dismissed the thought as a coincidence, a popular song, perhaps. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Minji's presence did not go unnoticed by everyone. Mrs. Park, the head housekeeper, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and an almost fanatical loyalty to the memory of the late Mrs. Lee, watched Minji with growing suspicion. She had served the Lee family for decades and saw the new cook as an intruder, a threat to the established order. "She is, too, familiar with the young ladies," Mrs. Park murmured to one of the other maids, while Minji laughed in the garden with Ha-eun and Jiwoo, teaching them to plant small seeds. "It's not her place. A cook should stay in the kitchen." Minji's glass castle was under scrutiny, the first scratches appearing. One afternoon, as Minji was preparing japchae, Ha-eun entered the kitchen, her eyes curious. "Unni, you cook like Mommy. She also cut the carrots like this, in very thin strips, and she always put a little honey in her japchae to make it sweet." Minji stopped, the knife suspended. She always added a touch of honey to her japchae, a recipe from her grandmother. It was a culinary secret, a subtle detail. "Your mommy also did that?" she asked, her voice a little choked. Ha-eun nodded, a melancholic smile. "Yes, and she had an apron with flowers, just like yours." Minji looked at the simple apron the maid had given her, printed with small blue flowers. It was a gift, she thought. That night, Jinwoo was in his office reviewing documents when he heard his daughter's voices coming from the corridor. They were talking to Minji, who was taking them to bed. "Unni, you look like Mommy when you smile," Jiwoo said, her voice childlike and innocent. A tense silence followed. Jinwoo froze. He got up and walked to the door, peeking out. Minji was crouched, adjusting Jiwoo's blanket, and her smile was gentle, almost identical to what he remembered of his late wife. Jinwoo's heart raced. It wasn't just the food, it wasn't just the song, it was the smile. It was the way she moved, the way she interacted with the girls. He stepped away from the door, his hands trembling. What were his daughters seeing? What was he refusing to see? The truth the girls were about to unravel was not just about the nostalgia of a taste or a melody. It was about the soul, about connections that transcended time and memory. The Lee mansion, with its marble walls and its closely guarded secrets, was about to reveal a story Jinwoo had tried to bury. And Minji, the fallen cook he had rescued, was the catalyst, the mirror that would reflect a past he could no longer ignore. The lonely melody of the Lee mansion was gaining new notes, and the dissonance was just beginning. The tension was palpable, a premonition that the truth, however painful, was on its way, brought by the innocent lips of two children. The image of Minji's smile, reflected in Jiwoo's innocent face, etched itself into Lee Jinwoo's mind like a scar. He stepped away from his daughter's bedroom door, the silent corridor echoing the turmoil in his own chest. It wasn't just the lullaby, it wasn't just the japchae with honey, it wasn't just the floral apron, it was the smile. That gentle smile, almost identical to that of his late wife, Yoo-jin. The coincidence, once a series of isolated events, now wove itself into a disturbing pattern, a tapestry of memories he had tried to bury. Jin Woo, the man of logic and numbers, the CEO who had built an empire on cold reason, felt the ground beneath his feet crumble. He sat in his leather armchair in the office, the darkness of the night swallowing the mansion, but not the storm in his mind. How was it possible? Minji was a stranger, a woman who had collapsed at his gate, hungry and homeless. His wife Yujin was the epitome of grace and sophistication, born into a respectable family, a talented artist. Their worlds could not have been more distant. And yet, his daughters, with the purity of their childlike perception, were pointing to a connection his own heart refused to accept. In the days that followed, Jinwoo observed Minji with renewed, almost obsessive intensity. Her every move in the kitchen, every laugh with the girls in the garden, every gesture of affection. He looked for flaws, for something that would break the illusion, that would prove it was all just a projection of his own pain and his daughter's longing. But instead, he found more similarities. The way Minji tilted her head when listening to the children, the way her eyes sparkled when she spoke of simple food, the infinite patience she dedicated to Ha-eun and Ji-woo. The Lee mansion, once a sanctuary of silence, now resonated with life. The girls, previously pale and withdrawn, blossomed under Minji's care. They ate heartily, slept soundly, and most importantly, laughed. Laughed with a freedom Jinwoo hadn't heard in years. Minji took them for walks in the garden, teaching them the names of flowers and the importance of caring for them. She helped them with their homework, turning tedious tasks into fun games. She was, for them, a balm, a safe harbor, and an echo of something they had lost. Mrs. Park, however, did not share the enthusiasm. Her eyes, once merely suspicious, now carried a glint of resentment. She saw Minji's rise as an affront to Mrs. Lee's memory and the household hierarchy. A cook shouldn't meddle so much in family affairs, she grumbled to the other maids, who, for the most part, were enchanted by the new atmosphere in the mansion. She's taking advantage of the young lady's innocence. Where have you ever seen a maid sit down to read stories? Mrs. Park began to look for any slip-up from Minji, any mistake she could use to undermine her position. One morning, as Minji was preparing breakfast, Ha-eun and Ji-woo entered the kitchen, their faces eager. "Uni, can you make gimbap today? Mommy made the best gimbap in the world," Ji-woo pleaded, her eyes wide and hopeful. Minji smiled. "Of course, Ji-woo, but your mommy's gimbap must be unbeatable. I'll do my best." As Minji rolled the rice and vegetables in the seaweed sheets, Hubban watched intently. "Ani, Mommy always put a small piece of pickled radish in her gimbap, and she cut it into perfect rounds, just like you." Minji stopped, the pickled radish in her hands. It was another detail, a peculiarity of her grandmother's recipe, which she had learned and instinctively replicated. Her heart skipped a beat. These weren't just coincidences. They were echoes. That night, Jinwoo couldn't focus on his work. His daughter's words, the observations about the gimbap, the smile, the song, the apron. Everything mingled in a whirlwind. He found himself picking up an old, dusty photo album which held memories of Yujin. He leafed through the pages, his fingers trembling slightly. There were photos of Yujin in the kitchen, smiling, wearing a blue floral apron. There was a photo of her with the girls, singing a lullaby, her lips forming the same notes Minji now hummed. Then he found a photo that made him hold his breath. It was Yujin, young, perhaps in college, on a volunteer trip to a rural village. She was crouched, planting flowers with a group of children, and her smile was identical to Minji's. But it wasn't just the smile. It was the way she held the small shovel, the tilt of her head, the resilience in her eyes. And beside her, a small girl with wide, curious eyes watched Yujin with admiration. The girl had a smudge of dirt on her nose and unruly hair, and there was something familiar about her, something Jinwoo couldn't identify, but that pulled him with a magnetic force. At that exact moment, Jiwoo burst into the office holding a small drawing. "Daddy, Oni taught us how to draw. Look, it's Mommy." Jinwoo took the drawing. It was a simple, childlike but unmistakable portrait. Yoo-jin with her gentle smile and floral apron. But what shocked Jinwoo wasn't the drawing of his wife. It was the small detail Jiwoo had added next to it, a small blue flower almost identical to the one printed on Minji's apron, and which Yoo-jin wore in her hair in one of the album photos. "Unnie said Mommy loved these flowers, Daddy. She said they were the flowers of hope. And she also said Mommy had a little sister who also loved these flowers, but who got lost a long time ago." Jiwoo's words hit Jinwoo like a lightning bolt. A little sister. Flowers of hope. The photo album fell from his hands, scattering memories across the floor. The image of Yoo-jin, the little girl in the village photo, Minji's smile. The truth, which he had tried to bury under layers of ice and marble, was revealing itself, not through documents or investigations, but through the innocent voice of his daughter. The lonely melody of the Lee mansion was about to transform into a requiem for its secrets, and Jinwoo knew there was no escaping it now. The fallen cook was not just a stranger, she was the past, knocking at his door. The album lay scattered across the marble floor, a mosaic of broken memories. Yoo-jin, young and vibrant, in that faded photograph of a rural village. And beside her, the small girl, wide-eyed, her nose smudged with dirt and unruly hair. Ernie said Mommy loved these flowers, Daddy. She said they were the flowers of hope, and she also said Mommy had a little sister who also loved these flowers, but who got lost a long time ago. Jiwoo's innocent words echoed, a hammer striking the fortress of Jinwoo's denial. He picked up the photograph, his thumb tracing the faint image of the small girl. The same resilience in her eyes that he now saw in Minji's. The same gentle curve of her smile, even in childhood. Could it be possible? Could Minji, the woman who had collapsed at his gate, be the lost sister of his elegant and refined Yoo-jin? The thought was a whirlwind. It tore at his carefully constructed reality, scattering logic to the winds. Yoo-jin spoke little of her early childhood, only hinting at a difficult past, a family with whom she had lost contact. She had always been vague, her eyes clouding whenever the subject arose. He had respected her privacy, never pressing, assuming it was a painful memory best left untouched. But now, those vague hints coalesced into a terrifying and beautiful possibility. He looked again at Jiwoo's drawing, the flower of hope, so carefully depicted. Minji knew about these flowers, knew their meaning to Yoo-jin. How? Unless she had shared that story. In the days that followed, Jinwoo observed Minji with a feverish, almost desperate intensity. Her every move in the kitchen, every laugh with the girls in the garden, every gesture of affection. He was no longer looking for flaws, but for confirmations. The way she tilted her head when listening to the children, the way her eyes sparkled when she spoke of simple food, the infinite patience she dedicated to Ha-eun and Jiwoo, and above all, the smile. That smile that was a mirror of Yoo-jin's now carried the weight of an imminent revelation. He rummaged through his memory, trying to retrieve any fragment of conversation with Yoo-jin about her birth family. She had been adopted by a prestigious family in Seoul, but always mentioned having memories of a previous, simpler life in the countryside. "I used to play near a stream, and my little sister always followed me," she had once said with a melancholic smile, before abruptly changing the subject. At the time, Jinwoo had interpreted this as a childhood fantasy, a way to cope with the complexity of her adoption. Now, every word seemed like a premonition. Mrs. Park, with her keen insight and growing resentment, noticed the change in Mr. Lee's behavior. He was more distant, more thoughtful, and his eyes followed Minji with a fixation that went beyond simple employer observation. She saw the cook, once a humble and insignificant figure, blossom in the mansion, winning the hearts of the children and, apparently, the attention of the master. "She is weaving her web," Mrs. Park murmured to herself, her lips thin and tight. "This woman is not who she says she is." One afternoon, Jinwoo found Minji and the girls in the garden. Minji was teaching them to identify different types of flowers. "This is the flower of hope," Minji said, pointing to a small blue flower almost identical to Jiwoo's drawing and the one Yoo-jin wore in her hair in some photos. "My grandmother used to say they grow even in the most difficult places and that they remind us never to lose faith." Jinwoo felt a shiver run down his spine. He approached, his voice a little hoarse. "Minji, you always knew about these flowers?" Minji turned, a gentle smile on her face. "Yes, Mr. Lee. My grandmother taught me. She said they were my older sister's favorite flowers too. She called them flowers of hope, because no matter how difficult life was, they always bloomed." The mention of older sister was an electric shock. Minji spoke of an older sister who loved the same flowers, with the same words, the same memories. Yoo-jin was the older sister. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with painful precision. Jinwoo felt the world spin. He looked at Minji, at the smile on her face, at the innocence in her eyes. She didn't know, she couldn't know. The woman he had rescued, the cook who had brought life back to his home, was the lost sister of his late wife. The woman Yoo-jin had lost, and whom he, in his ignorance, had brought into his own life. The truth was no longer a suspicion, but an overwhelming certainty. Minji was Lee Minji, Yoo-jin's sister, whom Jinwoo had promised himself to protect, even without knowing who she was. The Lee mansion, with its closely guarded secrets, had finally revealed its greatest mystery. And Jinwoo, the man of logic and numbers, now found himself at the center of a family drama that would transcend all his expectations. The lonely melody of the Lee mansion was no longer a dissonance, but a lament, a prelude to a long-awaited reunion and to the truths that would come to light. He had to act, had to discover the full story. But how? And what would this truth do to all of them? Jinwoo's world spun, not in a confused blur, but in a terrifying clarity. Minji's words, "My grandmother taught me. She said they were my older sister's favorite flowers too," echoed in his mind like a death knell and, at the same time, a hymn of hope. The older sister, Yoo-jin. The connection was undeniable, painful in its simplicity. He looked at Minji, who smiled at the girls, completely oblivious to the storm she had just unleashed in her employer's heart. The innocence in her eyes was a blow, a reminder that she had lived an entire life without knowing the truth that now hung between them. Jinwoo felt the air thin, as if all the oxygen had been sucked from the garden. He needed a moment, a pretext to step away, to breathe. I need to make a call," he managed to murmur, his voice hoarser than expected. He moved away, leaving the girls and Minji among the flowers, the sound of their childish laughter a cruel contrast to the chaos in his mind. Locked in his office, Jinwoo allowed himself to collapse into the chair, his head in his hands. The truth was a two-headed monster. One, the joy of having found a lost piece of Yoo-jin. The other, the terror of the implications. How could he have been so blind? So many signs, so many echoes, and he had dismissed them as coincidences, as his daughter's desire to keep their mother's memory alive. But they were not coincidences. They were whispers of fate, cries from the past. He remembered the few times Yoo-jin had spoken of her childhood before adoption. Fragments of memories of a simple life, of a stream, of a little sister who followed her everywhere. Yujin always changed the subject quickly, a shadow of pain crossing her face. Jinwoo, in his arrogance and ignorance, had assumed they were painful memories of abandonment, of a family she had lost. He never imagined that the little sister could be alive, and that he himself would bring her into his home. Guilt hit him hard. He had promised Yujin he would take care of her daughters, that he would keep her memory alive. And now he realized he had failed on a deeper level, not only in recognizing her sister, but in not having investigated more about his wife's past. He had respected her privacy, yes, but perhaps that privacy had hidden a wound he could have healed. The image of Minji, with her silent resilience, her genuine kindness, and that smile that was a mirror of Yujin's, filled his mind. She had arrived at his door, fallen and vulnerable, a gift from fate disguised as misfortune, and he, the millionaire CEO, had offered a job to a woman who was, in fact, his sister-in-law. The irony was brutal, almost comical, if it weren't so profoundly tragic. He had to act, but how? The revelation could not be simply thrown at Minji without preparation. She deserved the full truth, the story of her sister, of her family, of her past. And the girls? How would Jiwoo and Haun react to learning that the Unni they loved so much was, in fact, their aunt, their mother's sister? It would be a joy, yes, but also confusion. A redefinition of everything they knew. Jinwoo knew he needed more than intuition. He needed facts, irrefutable proof. He needed to fill in the gaps in Yujin's story. Where were her adoption documents? Was there any mention of a sister, of her biological family? He had kept all of Yujin's papers in a safe, a sanctuary of her life that he rarely visited since her death. Now he needed to open it. He stood up, the decision hardening his jaw. It wasn't just about Minji or the girls. It was about Yujin. It was about honoring her memory, about bringing peace to an interrupted story. He walked to the bookshelf, where an old volume of philosophy hid the key to the wall-mounted safe. His fingers trembled slightly as he dialed the combination, a sequence of numbers he had memorized years ago, the date of his first meeting with Yujin. The safe opened with a soft click, revealing stacks of documents, marriage certificates, diplomas, and at the bottom a worn leather folder. Personal documents, Yujin, was written in her elegant handwriting. He pulled it out, the smell of aged paper and memories filling his nostrils. Inside, he hoped to find the answers, the missing pieces to assemble the puzzle. As Jinwoo sifted through the papers, Mrs. Park watched from afar, her eyes narrow and calculating. She had noticed the change in Mr. Lee's behavior, the intensity of his gaze on Minji, the way he had retreated to his office with unusual urgency. She didn't know the truth, but her keen instincts from years of service in wealthy homes warned her. Something was happening, something big, and the humble cook was at the center of it. "What are you hiding, Minji?" she murmured, a dark premonition forming in her chest. "And what is Mr. Lee looking for?" Jinwoo, oblivious to Mrs. Park's surveillance, found what he was looking for. Yujin's adoption documents. He opened them, his heart pounding in his chest. There it was, in small print, the story of a child delivered to an orphanage, and a note about a younger sister, Lee Minji, who had been separated from her in tragic circumstances during a period of great family difficulty. The confirmation was devastating and liberating at the same time. Minji was, without a shadow of a doubt, Yujin's lost sister. The lonely melody of the Lee mansion was about to transform into a symphony of revealed truths, and Jinwoo knew that the first movement would be the most difficult. He had to confront the past, not only Yujin's, but his own and Minji's. The secret which he had inadvertently brought into his home now demanded to be unraveled. And he, the man who avoided drama, was about to become its protagonist. The yellowed sheet of paper trembled in Jinwoo's hands, not from weakness, but from the earthquake that shook his world. Lee Minji. The name, written in formal calligraphy, was the final confirmation, the irrefutable proof that fate had woven a complex and painful tapestry. The younger sister, separated in tragic circumstances. The words echoed in his mind, each syllable a blow, a revelation. He had promised Yujin he would take care of her daughters, that he would keep her memory alive. But now, he realized that Yujin's memory was not just a recollection. It was a living presence, breathing and smiling in his own home, in the form of Minji. Guilt hit him with overwhelming force. He, the astute businessman, the CEO who had built an empire, had been blind to the signs, to the coincidences that were not coincidences, to the echo of Yujin's soul in Minji. He had focused on the pain of loss, on the need to protect his daughters, but had failed to see the truth that was right before his eyes. The irony was cruel. He had rescued his wife's sister, the woman Yujin had lost, and had brought her into his life under the pretext of simple charity. Jinwoo closed his eyes, trying to process the torrent of emotions. Joy for having found such a vital piece of Yujin, fear for the implications of this truth, and a fierce determination to correct the mistakes of the past, to fill in the gaps, to honor his wife's memory in a way he never imagined possible. But how? The revelation could not be abrupt. Minji deserved the truth told with delicacy, with the full context of her story and Yujin's story. And the girls? How would Ji-woo and Ha-eun, who had already lost so much, react to learning that their beloved cook, their Unnie, was in fact their aunt, their mother's sister? He needed a plan, not just a plan to reveal the truth, but a plan to understand the full extent of that truth. Yujin's adoption documents were a start, but what had happened to Minji after they were separated? Where had she lived? What life had she led? He couldn't just ask her. That would be cruel and confusing. He needed facts, a clear timeline, a complete understanding before any words were spoken. With the document folder still in hand, Jinwoo picked up his phone. He dialed a number he rarely used, that of a trusted private detective, someone discreet and efficient. "I need a favor," he said, his voice low and controlled, despite the storm within him. "An investigation, very sensitive, about a person and her past." He gave Minji's name and the few details he knew, asking for the investigation to be done with the utmost discretion, without Minji knowing anything. He needed to know everything about her life, from the moment she was separated from Yujin. As Jinwoo spoke on the phone, Mrs. Park, with her sharp perception and eagle eye, noticed Mr. Lee's office door ajar. She saw his silhouette, tense, the phone to his ear, and the worn leather folder on the table. Her curiosity and distrust sharpened. Mr. Lee had been acting strangely since the cook arrived. First, the unusual attention, then the fixation, and now this urgency, this reclusion, and a secret call. Something is very wrong, she thought, her thin lips tightening. This woman is bringing trouble to this house. Jinwoo ended the call, feeling a slightly lighter weight, but anxiety still consumed him. He needed time for the detective to gather information, time for himself to process everything, and time to prepare the ground for the revelation. He put Yujin's documents back in the safe, but the image of Minji smiling in the garden, teaching the girls about the flowers of hope, remained vivid in his mind. He now saw her not just as the cook, but as the guardian of a secret, the missing piece in his family's puzzle. The tension in the mansion was palpable, although only Jinwoo and Mrs. Park were aware of it. Minji continued her daily tasks, oblivious to the storm brewing around her. The girls, Ji-woo and Ha-eun, blossomed under her care, their laughter filling the corridors that were once silent. They clung to Minji, and this deep bond only made the future revelation even more complex and emotional. Jinwoo knew that time was running out. He couldn't keep this truth hidden for long. The detective promised quick results, But even so, each day was torture. He needed to be strong, not only for himself but for Yoo-jin, for Minji, and above all, for his daughters. The Lee mansion, with its secrets and its lonely melody, was about to witness one of the deepest family reunions, and Jin-woo, the man who avoided drama, was at the center of it all, holding the reins of a destiny he never imagined was his. The truth was an unstoppable force, and he needed to be ready for when it finally exploded. The days dragged on in the Lee mansion, each one heavier than the last for Jin-woo. He observed Minji, no longer with the distance of an employer, but with the blurred lens of guilt and revelation. Her every laugh with the girls, every dish she lovingly prepared, every flower she tended in the garden, seemed an echo of Yoo-jin herself. The resemblance was not just physical, it was in the soul, in the silent resilience, in the way she radiated an unwavering kindness that filled the voids left by loss. It was as if a piece of his wife had returned, an unexpected gift from fate, but one that arrived wrapped in acute pain for the truth he had ignored for so long. Anxiety gnawed at Jin-woo. He awaited the detective's call like a prisoner awaits a verdict. Every phone ring made him jump. Every prolonged silence plunged him deeper into uncertainty. He needed more than the confirmation of a name on a yellowed paper. He needed the complete story, the tapestry of Minji's life, to understand the extent of what had been lost and what could now be recovered. Meanwhile, Mrs. Park intensified her surveillance. Her eyes, once merely curious, now held the cold glint of certainty. She noticed the way Mr. Lee looked at Minji, an intensity that was not that of a boss for an employee. She saw him isolate himself in the office, the phone always close, whispering in conversations that seemed secret. The worn leather folder, which he had put away with such urgency, never left her mind. There's something very wrong here, she thought, her mind churning. This woman is not who she says she is, or Mr. Lee is hiding something about her. One afternoon, while Minji was in the garden with the girls, teaching them to identify aromatic herbs, Mrs. Park saw her opportunity. She approached the kitchen where Minji had left her bag. With a quick glance around, she opened the bag, rummaging through it with agile fingers. There wasn't much. A modest wallet, a cloth handkerchief, a small scribbled recipe book, but at the bottom she found an old, faded photograph. It was a picture of two small girls, hugging, smiling at the camera. One of them looked incredibly familiar. Before she could examine it more closely, she heard footsteps. Quickly, she put the photo back and closed the bag, returning to her usual posture as an exemplary maid. Minji entered the kitchen, her cheeks flushed from the sun, and a gentle smile. "Mrs. Park, the girls are thirsty. Could you prepare some fruit juice for them?" "Of course, Minji-shi," Mrs. Park replied, her voice as smooth as ever, but her narrow eyes fixed on Minji for an instant longer. The image of the photo, and the resemblance of the girl in the photo to the late Mrs. Lee, hammered in her mind. The detective's call came the next morning. Jin-woo answered on the first ring, his voice hoarse with anticipation. "Mr. Lee, I have some preliminary information about Lee Minji." The detective began to report. Minji and Yoo-jin were indeed separated in an orphanage. Yoo-jin was adopted first. Minji, younger, remained longer, facing difficulties. She was adopted by a family in a rural area, but the adoption did not last. The family was poor and, in time, returned her to the orphanage. She went through a few more temporary homes, always in precarious conditions, before finally being taken in by an elderly woman who raised her with affection but with few resources. Minji's life had been a succession of losses and difficult fresh starts, marked by resilience and solitude. Every word from the detective was a stab in Jin-woo's heart. Minji's life of deprivation contrasted brutally with the life of comfort Yoo-jin had had after her adoption. Guilt crushed him. He had rescued Minji from a life of hardship and uncertainty. Yes, but he could have done so much sooner, if only he had looked more closely, if he had investigated Yu Jin's past with the same diligence he applied to his business. "There's more, Mr. Lee," the detective continued. "The lady who raised her passed away a few years ago. Minji has worked various jobs since then, always with great difficulty. She never knew she had an older sister, or at least never had the means to look for her. Her story is one of deep solitude, but also of remarkable strength." Jinwoo hung up the phone, his hands trembling. Minji's story was a testament to her strength, but also a painful reminder of what she had lost. He had promised Yu Jin he would take care of her daughters, but now he realized his wife had left an even greater legacy. A sister who needed to be found, loved, and reintegrated into the family she never knew she had. The tension in the mansion reached a new level. Jinwoo, with the truth weighing on him, observed Minji with a mixture of reverence and pain. Mrs. Park, with the image of the photo in her mind, felt she was about to unravel a monumental secret. She knew the photo she had seen in Minji's bag was of Yu Jin as a child. The missing piece was almost in her hands. The girls, oblivious to the storm brewing, continued to blossom under Minji's care. Jiwoo and Ha-eun clung to Unni with the innocence and unconditional love of children. Their laughter filled the corridors, but for Jinwoo, each laugh was a reminder of the complexity of the truth he needed to reveal. He knew he could no longer delay. The truth was an unstoppable force, and he needed to be ready for when it finally exploded, redefining the future of everyone in the Lee mansion. The lonely melody was about to become a chorus, and the first chord would be the most challenging. The truth, like a lightning bolt, had struck Minji, but it had not purified her. Instead, it left her in ruins, a field of emotional wreckage where pain and confusion mingled. Embracing the girls, Jiwoo and Ha-eun, she felt the warmth of their small bodies, the innocence of their laughter, and the cruel irony of it all suffocated her. Her nieces, her sister's blood, the only living part of Yu Jin she could touch, hug, love. And she had spent months caring for them, feeling an inexplicable connection, without knowing the depth of their bond. "Annie, are you crying?" Ha-eun's soft voice asked, her small fingers touching Minji's wet face. Minji forced a smile, trying to swallow the lump in her throat. "No, darling, they're tears of joy. I'm so happy to be with you." It was a lie, but one she hoped the girls would accept. How to explain to them that the woman they called Annie was, in fact, their aunt, their mother's sister? How to explain to them the pain of a loss she herself had only just discovered? Silent tears continued to flow as she hugged them tighter, seeking comfort and, perhaps, forgiveness. Forgiveness for not having known, for not having searched harder, for not having felt her sister's presence sooner. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Mrs. Park moved with renewed, almost feverish energy. Her eyes, once merely suspicious, now held the cold gleam of certainty. She had made some calls, and the information she obtained only solidified her convictions. Minji was not just an employee, she was an intruder, a threat to the order and reputation of the Lee family. "Miss Minji," Mrs. Park's voice echoed through the living room, cutting the air like an ice blade. Minji separated from the girls, feeling the weight of the housekeeper's gaze. "I need you to help me with the shopping list. There are some things that need to be resolved immediately." It wasn't a request, it was an order. And the tone, though formal, carried a hint of disdain that Minji could not ignore. She felt a chill, the sense that the storm Jinwoo had predicted was already manifesting. Upstairs, Jinwoo observed the scene, his heart heavy. He knew Mrs. Park would not waste time. She was loyal to the Lee family in her distorted way and saw Minji as a threat. He needed to act, but how? How to protect Minji without exposing her further, without fueling the rumors Mrs. Park would surely spread? He descended the stairs, his imposing presence interrupting the tension in the room. "Mrs. Park," he said, his voice calm, but with unquestionable authority. "I would like to speak with Miss Min-ji privately. The shopping list can wait." Mrs. Park turned, a forced smile on her lips. "Of course, CEO Lee. I was just trying to be efficient. There's a lot to be done in this house." Her eyes, however, cast a warning glance at Min-ji before she retreated, the kitchen door closing with a subtle but audible click. Jin-woo approached Min-ji, who was still kneeling, the girls nestled in her arms. "Min-ji-si," he began, his voice softer now. "I know it's a lot to process, but you're not alone. I'm here. The girls are here." Min-ji looked up at him, the pain still present, but also a new determination. "What will Mrs. Park do?" she asked, her voice low. She hates me." Jin-woo sighed. "Mrs. Park is protective. She believes she's acting in the family's best interest, but I won't let her hurt you, I promise." He knelt too, getting down to the girls' level. "Ji-woo Haun, why don't you go play in your room for a bit? Daddy needs to talk to Min-ji Uni." The girls, sensing the seriousness in the air, nodded and ran off, their laughter fading. "Min-ji-si," Jin-woo continued, his voice now more urgent. "I know you need time, but the outside world, it won't wait. Mrs. Park has connections. She might try to use this information against you, against us. We need to decide how we're going to present this, not just to the family, but to the public if necessary." Min-ji felt a shiver. The public? She, a simple caregiver, now at the center of a potential scandal. The idea was overwhelming. I don't know. I can barely breathe with all this." "I understand," Jin-woo said, reaching out to touch her shoulder, this time without hesitation. "But you are strong, Min-ji-si. You always have been, and you are not alone. I will protect you, and we will do this together." He helped her up. Min-ji felt the firmness of his hand, the sincerity in his eyes, but the promise of protection, though comforting, did not erase the pain nor the uncertainty. She was Yoo-jin's sister, the girl's aunt, and the woman the widowed CEO had helped at his gate. Her life had changed forever, and the battle to accept this new reality and to be accepted by it was just beginning. At that moment, Jin-woo's phone rang. He looked at the caller ID, and his face tightened. It was a number he recognized, a board member of the company, a close friend of Yoo-jin's family. The storm was not just approaching, it had arrived, and the first lightning bolt had just struck. Jin-woo's phone rang in the room, a jarring sound that seemed to tear the veil of fragile intimacy he had tried to build with Min-ji. The name on the caller ID, Lee Sang-hyun, a board member, a longtime friend of Yoo-jin's family, was a dark premonition. The storm was not just approaching. It had arrived, and the first lightning bolt had just struck. Jin-woo answered, his voice firm, but with palpable tension. "Sang-hyun-hyung. Yes, it's me." Min-ji watched, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't hear the words from the other end of the line, but she saw Jin-woo's expression tighten, his eyes darken. He nodded occasionally, his jaw clenched. "I understand. Yes, I know. No, it's not what it seems. I will explain. Yes, I know Mrs. Park. No, she doesn't have all the facts. I assure you there's nothing dishonorable. It's a complex situation." The conversation stretched for minutes that felt like an eternity. Min-ji felt a chill down her spine. Mrs. Park's words, her look of condemnation, the feeling of being an intruder, all of it materialized now in the distant voice on the phone. She was the center of a scandal, a stain on the Lee family's reputation, and all for a truth she could barely comprehend. Jin-woo finally hung up, the phone in his hand feeling like an unbearable weight. He looked at Min-ji, the pain in his eyes mingling with fierce determination. "Mrs. Park wasted no time," he said, his voice hoarse. She called Sang-hyun-hyung, spreading a distorted version of the story. She said you're an opportunist trying to infiltrate the family, taking advantage of the situation. Minji felt the air thin in her lungs. But why? I never wanted any of this. I just wanted to take care of the girls. Tears returned, hot and bitter. She was a caregiver, a sister, an aunt, not a villain. Jinwoo approached, taking her hands. I know, Minji-si, I know, but the truth is complex, and people prefer the simplicity of a scandal, especially when money and reputation are involved. He squeezed her hands. But we won't let them destroy you. We won't let them destroy our family. The word "our" echoed in Minji's mind. Our family. It was a promise, a shield, but also a terrifying responsibility. What are we going to do? She asked, her voice a whisper. We're going to tell the truth, Jinwoo declared, his voice full of conviction. The full truth, on our own terms. We won't let Mrs. Park or anyone else control the narrative. He paused, his eyes fixed on hers. I'm going to call a meeting with the board and the closest members of Yujin's family, and you'll be there, Minji-si, by my side. The idea of facing a group of powerful people, all looking at her with judgment, made Minji's stomach churn. She, a simple woman who had collapsed at a millionaire's gate, would now have to defend her honor and her identity. But looking at Jinwoo, at the strength in his eyes, she felt a spark of courage. He was right. She wasn't alone. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Mrs. Park listened, her ears as sharp as a predator's. She had overheard Jinwoo's phone conversation, and the part about telling the truth put her on alert. She couldn't allow that. The Lee family's reputation was her legacy, and Minji was a threat to everything she had built and protected for decades. She picked up the phone again, dialing a different number, her voice low and urgent. Yes, it's Mrs. Park. I have crucial information about CEO Lee and the new caregiver. It's more serious than they think. We need to act before it's too late. The next day, the Lee mansion was abuzz. Not just with the usual preparations, but with palpable tension. Board members and some of Yujin's relatives began to arrive, their faces displaying a mixture of curiosity, concern, and skepticism. Mrs. Park greeted them with impeccable formality, but her eyes cast disdainful glances in Minji's direction, who was in the living room, dressed in a simple but elegant hanbok that Jinwoo had provided. Minji was nervous, her hands sweating. Jiwoo and Ha-yun, sensing the seriousness of the moment, were quiet beside her, holding her hands. "Honey, are you okay?" Jiwoo asked, her voice soft. Minji forced a smile. "Yes, darling, I'm fine. Just a little anxious." Jinwoo descended the stairs, his imposing presence filling the space. He was dressed in a dark suit, his face serious, but his eyes met Minji's and conveyed a message of unwavering support. He knelt to the girls. "My princesses, you are the bravest. Today, we're going to tell a very important story. A story about our family." He kissed their foreheads. "You can go play in your room for now. Daddy and Minji-oni need to talk to these people." The girls, though reluctant, obeyed, casting worried glances at Minji before going upstairs. Jinwoo stood up, extending his hand to Minji. She took it, feeling the strength and warmth that anchored her. Together, they entered the dining room, where the guests were seated around the large table. All eyes turned to them. The silence was deafening. Jinwoo cleared his throat, his voice clear and resonant. "Thank you all for coming. I've convened you today to clarify a situation that, unfortunately, has been misinterpreted and irresponsibly spread." His eyes briefly fixed on Mrs. Park, who stood near the door, her expression impassive. "As many of you know," Jinwoo continued, "Ms. Minji has been an exceptional caregiver for my daughters. What you may not know is that her connection to this family is much deeper than that of a simple employee." He paused, and Minji felt her heart race. Minji-si, Jinwoo said, turning to her, is the younger sister of my late wife, Yujin. She is Jiwoo and Ha-Yun's aunt. A murmur ran through the room. Shock, disbelief, and some looks of understanding. Mrs. Park paled, her mouth slightly agape in shock. Her unwavering certainty had been shattered. Minji stepped forward, her voice trembling, but gaining strength with each word. I didn't know. I was separated from my sister when we were children. I only discovered the truth a few days ago. I'm sorry for any misunderstanding, but my only intention has always been to care for Jiwoo and Ha-Eun, the only living memories of my sister I could find. Minji's words, laden with genuine emotion, began to break the ice. Some of Yujin's relatives, who knew her well, began to see the resemblance in her eyes, in her gestures. It was undeniable. Jinwoo picked up the photograph of young Yujin and Minji, which Minji had found in the office, and placed it on the table. This photograph was what led us to the truth. The resemblance is undeniable, and the documents I obtained confirm everything. The tension began to dissipate, replaced by reluctant acceptance, and in some cases by sincere understanding. The story was not one of opportunism, but of a family tragedy and an unexpected reunion. Mrs. Park, seeing her plot crumble, tried one last card. But CEO Lee, the family's reputation, a caregiver becoming part of the family like this, suddenly, what will people say? Jinwoo turned to her, his voice cold and authoritative. Mrs. Park, the Lee family's reputation is built on truth and honor, and my late wife's honor is to have a sister who, unknowingly, cared for her daughters with love and dedication. Your attempt to defame Minji-si and sow discord is what truly stains this house. He paused, his voice softer but still firm. Your service to the Lee family has been long, but your loyalty seems to have strayed into prejudice. I believe it is time for you to retire. Mrs. Park staggered back, her face pale. The dismissal, the disgrace was a blow she never expected. The days that followed were days of adaptation. The news spread, but Jinwoo's version, supported by evidence and Minji's emotion, prevailed. The media, always eager for a good story, transformed the scandal into a modern fairy tale of family reunion. Minji, now officially the girl's aunt, and an undeniable part of the Lee family, began to blossom. The pain of Yujin's loss was still there, but now it was tempered by the joy of having her nieces and the acceptance of her new place in the world. Jinwoo, watching Minji play with the girls in the garden, felt a peace he hadn't experienced since Yujin's death. The lonely melody of the Lee mansion had transformed into a harmonious chorus, full of laughter, love, and the promise of a future. He had promised to protect her, and he had delivered. But more than that, he had found in Minji not just an aunt for his daughters, but a partner, a friend, and perhaps with time, something deeper. The storm had passed, leaving behind not destruction, but a new beginning. The truth, though painful, had purified, revealing the unbreakable bonds of a family that against all odds had found its way back home. And at the center of it all stood Minji, the woman who had collapsed at the gate and who now stood firmly in the heart of the Lee family.